Brothers, let's move on to what definitely is the oddest message, I think, so far, the one that Kevin brought.
Thank you.
Because it was a wonderful message.
Sure.
And I say that with some irony, but Kevin had the chutzpah to get up at an evangelical meeting and talk for an hour, assuming there was an hour's worth of interest in the topic of God.
There was barely. No, there was.
And Kevin, I have heard such appreciation for your message, brother.
No, thank you. No,
See a lot of
joy.
it. Yeah, absolutely.
Can you just remind us one more time why it is that you particularly went to immutability? You said this in your, I'm giving you a chance to just rehash it briefly.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, for two reasons, really. One, you know, in some of the current literature and discussions going on that some current students or others may be aware of, and most aren't, and that's fine. There's a lot of discussion. Hopefully it can be friendly discussion. It's including a number of people we love and like, but a lot of discussion on how we ought to understand immutability. And some of those objections or challenges, we're trying to respond to some of those. I think in our cultural moment, and that's of several generational moment, there is this impulse to want to maximize the relatability of God. And we understand that, and we never want to lose that. But with that, I was trying to argue that we must be careful, we must be precise. So there's that sort of moment, and then as I got to the conclusion, as I had time to study over the last 6 months reading up on this, just seeing the massive good news. And I love to be able to, for my own soul, say, here's a big picture of God, and let's get precise and definitional, and let's look at these terms that theologians have wrestled with and see how this really matters. And I think it's good once in a while to say, man, my brain feels really full. And that's good. You don't learn to swim by just being in the deep end, but you're never going to learn to swim some laps if you stay in the shallow end.
Yeah. Belgic confession, devotional observations, answering Sunday school questions with real seriousness. And I never do this publicly, but A.W. Tozer's Knowledge of the Holy has a very sweet devotional chapter on the immutability of God.
Yes, another brother mentioned it.
A.W. Tozer, the Knowledge of the Holy. Brothers, thoughts on from the message?
Open theism used the regret of God as one of their main arguments.
Yeah.
God can't know the future, otherwise 1 Samuel 15:11 wouldn't be true. Namely, he couldn't possibly regret something he had done if he knew what was going to happen. It's just fake.
Yeah.
And I think that text, I would just encourage all of you, if you ever get into that argument, that's the text to go to, chapter 15, because there you have the clear statement. He regretted that he had made Saul king, and he does not change his mind as though he were a man. And I took my clue back in the mid-90s when it says as though he were a man, to say he does regret, but not like you regret. I personally don't find that those big words, anthropomorphism, anthropopathism, or whatever that was, I don't find those helpful.
I didn't think you would.
But
you guys should see what happens in our meals.
But putting those two texts beside each other is a clear statement that we can say what the Bible says. Same thing in Genesis 6, regretted that he had created man. And regretted that he had. So there is a way that at the very moment of creation, or at the very moment of appointing Saul king, he can know exactly what's going to happen to Saul, and his feeling bad about doing this is a real feeling bad. It's just not the way humans would feel it. And I think that may be all as far as you need to go with your folks, because...
So did he go too far?
No, because we're among pastors here. You need to push people as far as they can go. But and he said today in the van that he wouldn't do all that in his local church. So here and lots of places, it needs to be done. And one other thing, I think we ought to regularly, now and then, preach over our people's heads. In other words, if somebody isn't coming up and saying, oh, just, Pastor, just, like, I don't, woof. If some people aren't doing that.
John, what were they saying? They understood it. We understood it.
If they're not doing that, you're not lifting. Sure. You're not lifting your people. And I think the folks that aren't tracking are glad somebody can do that. Like they're saying, our pastor is a good shepherd. He recognized teeth in wolves I didn't know existed.
Yeah, I've consoled myself with that thought many a time. Al or Lig, anything on the immutability of God? We want to get to 1 Corinthians 5 and 6. Anything on the immutability
I think it is a scandal how many people in this room stated that they'd never previously heard a sermon on the immutability of God.
Scandal's a strong word.
It is a strong word, because you would think that at least by the time persons are in their 20s, they would have heard a sermon on just about every major attribute of God.
But see, I'm feeling challenged now to preach a topical series on the attributes of God, which I've never done. Did you do that?
I don't remember.
Albert, keep going.
The names of God can be the same thing.
Yeah.
I did that. Don't remember what I said, though.
But it had small words.
I do think.
Hey, none of that. None of those escape hatch words.
Yeah, okay.
Ligon.
I do think one of the reasons why people would report that they've never heard sermons on this is there has been a loss of confidence in the classical articulation of the doctrine of God amongst many evangelicals, and open theism is testimony to it. It didn't cause it; it's just the final symptom of it.
You know,
You're going to Exodus 3:14. I am who I am, for essential constancy or immutability. I could see all the biblical scholars in the world coming out of their seats with protest, right? You can't do classical theology from Exodus 3:14. I mean, you hear it all the time. It's relational. It's, I will always be there for you like I will always be there for you. Has nothing to do with ontology or anything. And I would just say, if you read that, just be real slow to get on that wagon. Just think yourself, what does I am who I am mean? Think it through for yourself of whether it has implications of absolute being or not. I think it does, and I don't want to be inattentive to contemporary biblical Old Testament contextualized scholarship, but I don't want to be intimidated by it either, as though like, oh, now we understand. Those poor benighted, scholars like Anselm and the others, they didn't know what they're talking about.
If you don't connect it to the Hittites, it doesn't count, sort of. Yeah.
That'll be one way to say
Thank you, Kevin. I think we're going to turn to 1 Corinthians 5 and 6 because we need to spend at least 5 minutes on this.